Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and we have today Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Glad
Great
to be
to
here.
have you. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hi, Jonathan. Hello, everyone.
You. And you told us that you have an amazing video for today. Let's start with that right away.
Yeah, let's start.
Today is Defense Intelligence Day. Under the leadership of Kyrylo Budanov, the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine is one of Ukraine's most secretive institutions. However, even the limited information available about them is impressive. Recently, the intelligence operatives have successfully targeted enemy aircraft on military airfields deep behind enemy lines, orchestrated the capture of an intact Russian Mi-8 helicopter, and landed in the occupied Crimea. They defended the Kyiv region from airborne assaults, made helicopter breakthroughs to the besieged Azovstal, and were the first to land on the Snake Island. Chief Intelligence Officer Kyrylo Budanov has personally participated in numerous raids on occupied territories. The DIU is also actively engaged in information and psychological operations, with one of them featured on their badge. The Russian intelligence badge features a bat, while the Ukrainian one shows an owl. It's worth noting that the traditional prey of the owl is bats.
Well, you tell me, the army, the country that has units like this, can be defeated? I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree, but unfortunately, they're not such numerous because we've got several hundred thousands of such special tasked officers. Then probably we could already won this war, but they are not numerous, but they're very effective. And the recent issue with the capture of that Mi-8 aircraft with one Russian pilot actually seized it from the Russian air fleet and just flew over the border. I've watched the interview with him, and also the Defense Intelligence. They've published a movie downed pilots of Russia. It's called "Сбитые летчики России." It's on YouTube, and I hope it's available with the English subtitles as well, because it's in Ukrainian. But I really advise you to watch it. It's just incredible and shows how effective our servicemen are against the Russian aircrafts. Despite that, Russia announced in the beginning of that invasion that they've destroyed all Ukrainian air defense systems, and it was really safe for Russian pilots to fly over Ukraine. And all those Russian, not just lieutenants, but colonels, even colonels, they were in such rush for easy awards that they decided to fly over Ukraine to bomb Ukrainian cities like they did it in Syria. And then they were just downed, they were captured, a lot of them were killed, and Russia lost, despite the big number of aircraft, including modern aircrafts, they lost a really big number of senior pilots and senior officers. So this was a really good result. And after that, they were afraid of flying deep into the Ukrainian territory. They are doing some missions on the front lines. They dropping some bombs, but they don't fly behind the front lines, and they not attack the Ukrainian cities with aircraft. They attack them, unfortunately, with missiles, but if they had the possibility to bomb Ukrainian cities like they were doing in the beginning of the invasion, or Chernihiv, Kharkiv, then probably we had the same situation as in Syria, in Aleppo, when they completely razed all the cities. The only two cities, Ukrainian significant cities, which Russian razed like they did it in Syria, they were Mariupol and Bakhmut, because they completely destroyed them using the aviation and bombs.
That will bring us, Jonathan, that question definitely will be for you. So I don't think you're surprised, because that's something what we touched on Tuesday in our program. We were discussing about, remember our old friend, Professor John Mearsheimer, where he evaluated why Russia will defeat Ukraine and will destroy it and put it in rubbles because of two factors. Number one is manpower. Russia has 4 times as big, if not 5, manpower as Ukraine. And second of all, artillery, which is queen of the war, and they have 10 times as big artillery as Ukraine. But what we just discussed, sometimes the quality takes over the quantity. Jonathan, what do you think in that regard?
Well, I tend to agree, because the Russians have already gone through the best quality forces that they have, and the replacements that they are putting into the fight are of lesser quality. And that catches up with you eventually, especially if they're looking. The Ukrainians are wisely focusing on counter-artillery and counter-battery operations, which are steadily reducing the number and amount of Russian artillery systems that are available for them to conduct any kind of offensive operations. And as far as air defense, the Patriot anti-missile systems, keep in mind, Patriot was originally designed to be the ultimate aircraft killer. It was because its missiles intercept at a speed of Mach 6 plus, over 6 times the speed of sound, and they can execute up to 30 G turns, faster and more maneuverable than any aircraft that exists. So Russian aircraft have to not only worry about normal air defenses, which are pretty formidable, but if you throw in Patriot, which can intercept any aircraft that exists, then the air defense environment for Russian aircraft over Ukraine becomes prohibitive. And so they are forced to stand back, to stay back. And that limits their ability to conduct offensive operations over Ukraine. In the meantime, the Ukrainians operating under their air defense umbrella, they are steadily making forward progress, incremental but steady forward progress in their offensive to cut the link between Russia and Crimea. That is still making progress. It is still moving forward, although not at the pace or the speed which certain Western experts would be, from their armchair positions, are coming to expect. They forget that Ukraine is operating under conditions somewhat similar to that of Great Britain during World War II, when it had its own manpower shortage to worry about. And they had to be relatively conservative in their choice of operations against Nazi Germany, because they simply could not afford to throw manpower, masses of manpower. They didn't have them. So they had to be very wise and judicious. That's why Churchill favored a more peripheral strategy versus Nazi Germany, versus going straight across the channel, because they were relying on the Americans to supply the manpower for that. So in any case, right now the air defense question and Mearsheimer's argument, he's arguing on the basis of just sheer mass of numbers and numbers in artillery and manpower, which is a very crude assessment. If you were to look at it crudely, obviously Russia should have had the war won on paper before they even started the war. But here they are withdrawing their massive numbers, and they're not on the offensive. They don't have the initiative. They're on the verge of having their supply link cut between Russia and Crimea. If this is Mearsheimer's idea of victory for the Russians, I'll take vanilla.
Jonathan, that his theory reminds me the pure mathematical approach, quasi-mathematical approach reminds me the old story. It was back in the late 60s. The Prime Minister of Ireland, he had a speech where he described Soviet Union as the godless country, anti-democracy, and it's about time to deal with that. So he phoned Brezhnev, who was a general secretary at the time of Soviet Union, and he said that, Mr. Brezhnev, Ireland is declaring the war against Soviet Union. So Brezhnev says, how many tanks do you have? He says, we have 55 tanks. Brezhnev says, we have 12,500 tanks. And how many warplanes do you have? He says, we have 76 warplanes. Brezhnev says, we have 17,500 warplanes. There was a silence, and then he says, the war is cancelled.
The war is canceled. Okay.
Cancelled. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of another story. Apparently, again, apocryphal. There was this really great computer they had back in the 1960s, which they were programming to try to predict to try to analyze the result of the Vietnam War. That basically they fed all available information about the United States and its opponent, North Vietnam, and they fed all that information into the computer. And the question was asked to the computer, when will we win? And the computer responded, you won in 1963. So, I mean, yeah, if you're looking just sheerly at numbers, yeah, if you looked at numbers, the Russians won back in 2018. But yeah, so that's ridiculous. You can't use just numbers.
Actually, this was why during the start of this invasion, the United States and other Western countries, they were considered that Ukraine will fall in that Russia will capture Kiev in 3 days, and Ukraine will fall in a week. And they were just analyzing the number of tanks which Russia had, the number of aircrafts, the number of manpower, but they didn't consider the most important thing, the Ukrainian experience of fighting Russians since 2014, and Ukrainian will for freedom. And they didn't consider that Ukrainians will unite after the start of Russian invasion. Russia and the United States, they were persuaded that Ukrainians will just flee in panic, and one part of Ukrainians will flee in panic, another part of Ukrainians will welcome Russian soldiers with flowers. But the reality actually
they were welcome with Molotov
different.
Cocktails.
Yeah.
But Ivan, maybe you will address that. I don't understand one thing. Russians already knew that there was a huge fighting for so many years in Donbas region. Okay, they got Crimea without any fight. There was a decision, probably influenced by the France, Germany, not to fight Russians at that time. And then there was a huge resistance in Donbas region. So why Putin and his advisors believed that now, so many years passed, with all the consultation of Ukraine by Western advisors and military buildup, they came to the conclusion that there would be no resistance now in 2022, when there was a resistance for all those 8 years. What do you think, Ivan?
I think that their expectations were based on the probably corrupted data which was provided by Russian agents in Ukrainian political society, like Medvedchuk, which Russia paid um, enormous money for bribing the politicians, for bribing the even probably some security officers, and he persuaded his boss in Kremlin that everything is okay, that the society is ready to welcome Russian soldiers with flowers, that the Ukrainian political uh, leadership is weak, and he actually told to Putin and his minions what probably they expected to hear, but he didn't told them the truth. I don't know whether he knew truth or not, but that's one point. Another point, they underestimated the Ukrainian military command, and this was I've heard a lot of discussions on that topic, and that Russians always considered Ukrainians pretty weak. They were like some Russian propaganda that drawn Ukrainians like some funny villagers who are drinking horilka, eating some onion and other stuff, and that they're just funny, but they're not power warriors. Actually, Russia. We are talking, not we, but someone are talking about great Russian culture and all their great artists and their great generals, but Russia seized a lot of them. A lot of so-called Russian artists like Malevich were actually Ukrainian. A lot of great Russian scientists like Korolev, who launched Yuri Gagarin to the space, who constructed the Russian, the Soviet rocket, which he was leader of Soviet rocket program. He was Ukrainian, and Russia seized a lot of such persons, and they also seized Cossacks, because the Western world know Cossacks as powerful Russian warriors, but Cossacks were actually Ukrainian. Cossacks appeared in Ukraine, and Cossacks were always fighting for Ukrainian freedom until Russia destroyed their fortifications, the Zaporizhzhia Sich, and they actually enslaved part of them and made them part of Russian army. Like now, what now Russia is doing, they're recruiting soldiers on occupied Ukrainian territories in order for Ukrainians fight against Ukrainians. And my own relatives in occupied Luhansk, they're hiding in their homes. Man, they can't go on the streets because otherwise they will be just captured and returned into soldiers. They using power to make Ukrainian population on occupied territories fight against the Ukrainians. And, not always Ukrainian population, Ukrainian men on occupied territories can't refuse it, because otherwise they can be killed or they can be imprisoned. Russia is frightening their relatives and all that stuff. So coming back to your question, I think that Russia in the end appeared the victim of their own propaganda, and that's why the reality was quite different for them. Another question is why they didn't stop when their blitzkrieg failed. This is actually the open question.
Well, there were some attempts to finish the conflict. I think a month after it started, sometimes March, maybe April of last year, and they just couldn't agree on the terms. And then, while they were talking, Bucha and Irpin, this tragedy happened, and after that, there could be no more any negotiations. That's from what I know. And now I would like to actually, gentlemen, you mentioned the Ukrainian advancement, although somewhat slow, or at least slower than we want it to be. But I noticed the commentaries in Western press and US including, they're changing actually quite a bit. Did you notice that?
Yes, I have, especially the most recent interview with the one of the chief analysts at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I used to work at one point, they are charged, especially during the Cold War, they are charged with analyzing the military capabilities, doing military political assessments, although they have other departments. But their largest job is analyzing the military and political capabilities of all potential opponents of the United States in the world. And they proportionately, they devote, right now, during the Cold War, obviously there was a huge devotion of the Defense Intelligence Agency's analysts and personnel to analyzing the Soviet threat, to analyzing all aspects of it. It was so specialized at one point that you could have an analyst in the agency building his or her entire career on analyzing one weapon system, the SS-21, for example. They could devote their entire analyzing all aspects of that system. They had that many personnel that they could devote and specialize to each aspect of the Soviet threat. Now, while that is not nearly the case now, they are somewhat more generalized than they were during the Cold War. They still devote a significant amount of their capability to analyzing various aspects of the Russian threat. And so they have a very good capability for assessing what the Russians are doing and are about to do. And so in this case, looking at the Russian-Ukrainian war, which DIA is now devoting a large, I would suppose any reasonable person would say that right now DIA is devoting as much of its capability as possible to analyzing the Russian-Ukrainian war. So therefore, they have their appropriate information, and they have the ability to analyze the situation as it is developing. They have probably come to realize that the Ukrainians are a lot better than they thought, a lot more capable than they thought. And they are seeing that the Ukrainians, analyzing the Ukrainians' military approach and their military doctrine, they are seeing that the Ukrainians have adapted Western aid to their own style of warfare and to their own, tailoring it to their own objectives and capabilities. They are not trying to imitate the Russians and simply throwing mass at the opponent. Instead, they are practicing more finesse in an effort to outmaneuver the Russians, outposition them, and use their superiority in selective ways so as to be able to, for example, the most obvious thing that people are realizing now is cutting off the Crimea from Russian resupply and reinforcement, using combination of air power, artillery, and other means to drones, yes, using all means available to make that supply line and reinforcement line untenable. And eventually, once it is actually severed by the advance of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, once there's actually a severing of it and the Russians can no longer reinforce, or resupply. That is what I predict or assess, if you want to call it that. That will be the moment when the Ukrainians will throw in their so far uncommitted reserves into an offensive into the Crimea, with the aim of being able to force the surrender of Russian occupation forces that are now isolated and cut off from reinforcement and resupply, force their surrender. Once that surrender is forced, then the Ukrainians can reoccupy Crimea, then switch their forces from occupation of Crimea to driving out the remainder of Russian forces in other occupied areas of Ukraine. And they will have a much stronger hand in the eyes of their Western allies, and they will also have a stronger hand in the eyes of the world in enforcing and pressuring the Russians to call it quits, call it a day, declare an armistice, withdraw from Ukraine, and let's go back to the status quo antebellum.
Excellent. And I would like to touch, before we finish our program today, I would like to touch about the visit of Blinken to Ukraine, Kiev. And Blinken is, from what I've heard, is the fiercest friend of Ukraine in all Biden's administration. He is to help as much as possible, to encourage Ukraine, help facilitate, like right now there is discussion about new $24 billion package to Ukraine. And some commentators, they're taking the change of Minister of Armed Forces, the Reznikov, with previously in the last few days there was a visit of very high Ukrainian politicians to Washington, and now just a few days later the Blinken's visit to Kyiv, and it seems to me that's part devoted to streamline Ukrainian processes to kill corruption, at least on the state level, so there will be everything is clean, so there will be much less critics from the Republicans about that you're throwing money and we don't know what's happened to that, or so on. So all that has to be and is being addressed, in my opinion, quite effectively. Ivan, what do you know about this? How in Kyiv people see the visit to Blinken?
There were huge traffic jams in Kyiv, and that actually was a sign that someone important came to Kyiv. And another sign of that was Russian missile and drone attack on the night before the visit. They tried to hit Kyiv with the missiles. They were attacking Odessa region with the drones. Luckily, all the missiles which were flying to Kyiv were shot down by Ukrainian anti-air defense, even including the Russian Iskander ballistic missile. Probably it was shot down by Patriot system, which we were talking about. But during the day when Blinken was in Kyiv, Russia committed another war crime in Konstantinivka in Donetsk region, and they hit, unfortunately, that region doesn't have Patriot systems. We don't have much of them, and it was not protected by Patriot, and Russia used it to attack the downtown Konstantinivka, the crowded market in Konstantinivka downtown, with ballistic missile, and for now 17 people are dead and more than 30 are injured. And by this, Russia obviously demonstrates that Blinken or Biden or even Xi Jinping can come to Kiev, but they will just kill Ukrainians, and no one can do nothing against that. Probably this is their position, and they're behaving like terrorists. We already knew that. We can end our today's show with a video
Yes, please.
from Konstantinivka, which illustrates how they attacked that peaceful city.
Excellent.
Ось прильот, арта російських окупаційних військ. Сьогодні влучання на центральний ринок міста Костянтинівки.
Тіло кого?
Тіло жінки.
А то вы уже далеко. Там машины нет.
What a grim picture, and it shows just what kind of war Russia is waging against what Putin earlier said, that they're our brothers, it's the same people, it's the same nation, and this is exactly what they're saying one thing, they're doing completely different thing. But there will be, of course, a payday sooner or later, and hopefully it will come really, really soon. In the meantime, I would like to thank you very much for participation in today's program. We'll see you Tuesday, same place, same time. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.